of English, and she said that's not enough. So therefore, I would like to thank her for making this effort for me to tune in and understand 100%, not 60 or 70. That said, my name is Martin Hermoso. I represent the UGT of Spain. It's one of the two biggest union confederations in Spain. I belong to the research department of the confederation. I have been working on all sorts of themes having to do with labor rights, and in particular with the future of work, with the platform economies, with digitalization, etc. I've also worked with the ILO on this. Now, in the case of Spain, as you know, the expansion of gig work in our country has been quite considerable, as in most European countries over the last few years. And we expect it to continue to develop in the future. In Spain, there are platforms of different types, but above all, the crowdfunding offline platforms, as they're called. That is, they require workers physically who will actually perform the work physically. Now, in our report, and our Don't Gig Up report, you have classifications, classifications 1, 2, and 3. For example, we have platforms for the distribution of food, like Globo, Deliveroo, Uber Eats. We also have platforms for the distribution of packages such as Amazon Flex, or things like Cabify or Uber for passenger transport. And we also have something that's on the rise, that is platforms for taking care of the elderly, or housekeeping. That is, housekeepers for homes. Now, as you know, that type of business and that type of organization of work is based on shifting the responsibility and the risk, the risks inherent in economic activities from the company to the workers. So in Spain, those platforms don't use workers that are employees, that are salaried employees. For the most part, they use independent workers or self-employed workers, and often in a fraudulent way. They hire self-employed workers rather than salaried workers. And that has a negative side, but it also has a positive side. The positive side is, well, it's positive for the companies because it gives them greater profits. But the negative side is negative for the workers because their relationship with the company is more precarious. They don't have the same rights, they don't have the same working conditions, or they don't have the same social protection as the salaried workers do. Moreover, that form of organization based on self-employed work also prevents the workers from organizing themselves and prevents them from participating in the life of the company through collective bargaining or through, for example, the rights to information and consultation. So in this basic inequality, in this situation of inequality, well, late in 2017, the platform, or union has an answer now. That was a network created by my union, by the UGT, and that platform was born with the objective of bringing the union closer to the platform workers. The purpose wasn't to contact the companies or the platforms themselves, but rather to contact the workers themselves, those who work for the platforms. Now that platform has three basic objectives when it was created. First of all, to become a useful tool for solving the problems and the needs of the platform workers. Using one of the media that it was most used to, that is new technology, the internet, etc. The second objective was to be a tool thanks to which the workers could consult the basic legislation applicable to them, get answers to their questions regarding their activities, their work. And the third objective is to gather information, accurate and up-to-date information on the situation faced by these platform workers, their working conditions, and how those working conditions change over time. We consider this platform, which was based on IG Metall's platform. But we took it a bit further. We said that that platform is our first virtual trade union chapter, which can make it possible for the union to be present in places and with groups of workers that it couldn't reach before, that it can't reach by any other means. These groups of workers that require special attention because of the very precarious nature of their work activities and of their working conditions. The platform, your union has an answer already. Well, we think that that platform has become a real reference for many of the riders in Spain. It's become a reference, but nonetheless, there's a lot of field work that we have to carry out. The platform isn't just something online. There has to be actual physical field work. We've had to go physically to the different places where the riders meet before they carry out their errands. And I mean, there was a lot of field work involved. It's not just a matter of launching a computer platform, and that was it. We're continuing to work to ensure our presence, which we think is essential in for this sort of activity, for these new forms of work. Now, it's still early days to provide data or to give you the effects of this platform yet, this virtual union platform, because in fact it's been around for just a bit over a year. But we think that it should continue to be the lines on which we should work. This is the way that we should continue to work with that group of workers. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Martine. Let me suggest that we go on without further ado to the Italian case to leave time for discussion.
Buongiorno.
Good morning to all of you. I'm Ivana Verorese. I'm the National Secretary of the UIL, the Italian Union of Workers. In Italy, the debate underway, which you often read about in the press, concerns the platforms for riders in particular. The government, as you know, we have a rather special kind of government right now, but even the government is looking at this issue, and it's trying to, in fact, remove the possibilities to negotiate for those riders. The colleagues who will speak about what's actually being done in contractual terms, but in fact, they're also platform workers. I mean, there's something that the unions are trying to do better, because often there are platforms that actually contribute to clandestine workers who are paid in cash, but they have no sort of insurance, they have no sort of social protection, no sort of receipt. Platforms, for example, if you need a nurse or a physiotherapist or someone to iron your clothes, well, often it's difficult when you ask for a real sort of documental proof of that work to get it. Often when we speak about physiotherapist or a nurse, these are often people who already have another job and who are doing that in order to make a little extra money. And so they're not really interested in having the work recognized formally. So there's a whole question of tax avoidance involved, as well as the avoidance of paying social protection. In 2011, I don't know if we can get slides, but anyway, in 2011, the part of the union that was responsible for looking at, for example, commerce, the tertiary sector and tourism, went online with a platform to try to intercept the workers at the time of ICTs, workers who have a high level of professionalism, but often, I mean, these people who are self-employed, and they were very good at carrying out their jobs, but they didn't know very much about their rights. So therefore, since they didn't have a place where we could meet them because they weren't working on a shop floor, they were working at home, we created a network coordination with a series of services, for example. And here, can we go on to the next slide? Thank you. There's a union counter or one-stop shop, which is open to all of the different workers, including the riders, to provide replies to the questions asked by these workers in order to attract them to the unions. Often these are people who aren't used to speaking with unionists of their problems, and to give them answers with access through passwords to a forum where these people can ask questions to our union, and our union will try to answer them. Then there's a questionnaire that we put online in order to understand what the working conditions are of these platform workers. We're still gathering the replies. We want to determine what the real working conditions are, how dependent they really are, because we want to see, because if they are dependent workers, then they would have Social Security and all sorts of other types of social protection. there's an observatory on the gig economy with an ongoing survey in order to offer replies to the problems of digital work. And thanks to that, we're gathering a lot of data. So we've got this platform, which was created for the writers, but then it was opened up to others. In Italy, because of some, for example, accidents, fatal accidents of riders who are riding their bicycles. Because of certain accidents, certain fatalities, the whole question of the riders was discovered by Italy, and we're now trying to face it in the region of Lombardy, of Emilia-Romagna, of Lazio. Our union is very active. We're trying to organize assemblies for these riders through the youth branch of the UIL. We're trying to contact these people and meet with them and to explain to them that together we can they can protect themselves better, perhaps even get a contract. This is something that other speakers will address. In Bologna, in 2017, after a lot of snow fell, the riders, they couldn't work because of the snow, and so they decided to go on strike. There was a first meeting with the town, the city government, and they created a sort of charter to recognize the primary rights of these workers. The problem is that this Bologna charter was not signed by all the platforms. Some of them refused to recognize these workers' rights, but only by the smallest platforms. It's a charter that says that for these workers, there have to be the rights to information on the contractual elements. They have to know what their contractual conditions are, and the mechanisms of their rating, and the protection of the people and their fundamental property, a proper, decent pay that's no lower than those stipulated by the national labor contracts. So therefore, there's a certain standard for salaries are set, or for pay anyway, as well as a right to safety and health. That these platforms have to provide some sort of insurance for people if an accident occurs. And there's a whole question of when you are employed or when you aren't employed to determine that. There's a monitoring team that verifies the actual implementation of that charter. But that was just a first case. After that, there were other things that were done. Other regions began working on this. We've provided for other things that my colleagues will cover. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Ivana. So we've had our tour of Europe of initiatives, union initiatives. Let's open up the discussion. Try to make up for the 5 minutes time that we fell behind, and give ourselves at least 15 minutes for discussion. So the floor is open. Don't forget to introduce yourselves when you take the floor.
I would like to highlight 2 points, and I have some queries for Thomas, for our Spanish colleague, and Ivana. The main point that I would like to highlight is what we have already stressed in Poland. We are facing a very complex phenomenon, and we tried in our kickoff to conceptualize the varieties of forms of gig workers. And so we had in that occasion the chance to see that we could divide in 4 main areas gig workers. And I would like to repeat, because it's very important for us, because we are now stressing some points, some forms of gig economy, maybe we are forgetting some other forms. So in these 4 areas, we have in the first area the gig workers related to the Uber example, what we said, the taxi drivers or whatever is similar to Uber, Lyft, and so on. And we say that we are interested, but not so much, because we are still waiting for European institutions' approach to this problem, because we have an interaction between labor, industrial relation, and competition law. The second area is related to what we call TaskRabbit model. TaskRabbit means that we have a platform that try to match family, individual needs with professional, self-employed, small business activities. So we have the plumbers matching the families, just to give you an idea. TaskRabbit is that. The third area that is the most intriguing, the most interesting for all of us, is the delivery gig workers. Delivery means not only food, but also box, little box, whatever is a logistic related to a small area, a very limited area in the city, a quartier, a zone. So we have Deliveroo, Foodora, and so on. And I believe that all of us is in some way related to that. The fourth area is the less studied and analyzed area in this moment, is the Amazon Mechanical Turk model. It's a very difficult area, very difficult to understand what is happening. We have a lot of debating on the labor law that we can apply, tax law, and so on. Whatever. I mean, this is the 4 conceptualizing frame that we have, the 4 areas conceptualized frame. So I have some queries for our colleagues. The first, I would like, if we have time, also during the coffee break, maybe later, I would like to understand if there is an interaction between what you have studied and your statutory minimum wage regime. Statutory means, of course, minimum wage that is fixed by law, or, knowing the Italian case, by collective bargaining. And second, if you have maybe I did not get from Thomas this point, if you have already experiences of work council or whatever that is really related to the activity of the gig workers in your countries, but really, I mean, that is implemented and working. Yeah.
Should I give an answer? Yeah, okay. So, statutory minimum wage, of course, plays a role. I mentioned this aspect in this IG Metall Fair Crowd Work initiative, as the IG Metall tries to demand, put the demand on the platforms to pay at least the national minimum wage. So this is a kind of basic wage floor, and of course this is not easy.
So Thomas, they earn at least €9 per hour.
Yeah, it's probably
or pro rata, something
€9.
Like, yeah.
€9.19 or 15 or.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, yeah, 9.9.
It's
yeah,
about that. Yeah. Of course, if you look at the delivery services, for example, the food delivery, there you will find that most of these platforms offer the minimum wage. As in the food delivery, the workers are much closer to dependent workers, as they work only for one employer. And in the case of, in the German law, if you work only for one employer, you are regarded as a dependent employee, so they're not self-employed in the sense of crowd work or cloud work. So these platforms pay the minimum wage, at least, or a little bit more, depending. Maybe they've got a premium for delivering something or something like that. So there are differences. And there are also differences regarding the institutionalization of works councils, for example. We have these examples in Germany in this food delivery service sector. Yeah, we've examples of trying to implement works councils as a kind of bottom-up initiative. Yeah, bottom-up, organized by the workers themselves, whereas the initiative I described here are more focused on crowd workers, initiatives by the unions, so to say, top-down initiatives. The unions think about what can we do for the crowd workers and to organize crowd workers. That's the idea. Yeah, but there's no idea to implement works councils for the crowd workers, and no initiative by workers themselves. And I think the big difference is the difference in working conditions and in physical co-presence between these types of platforms and the delivery types of platforms, as these are locally delivered services, and so which gives the workers a possibility to meet locally with the other workers. The workers are working for Deliveroo or for Dora or so, they can meet in the offices which are physically present in cities. And this gives them the opportunity to talk about working conditions, to complain about things, and to develop the initiatives to change something. And this is something which the crowd workers on the Mechanical Turk platforms, they simply don't have, because they are isolated and they don't have physical co-presence. And I would say, therefore, this differentiation between the platforms, the different types of platforms you mentioned, is so important, because it the different types of platforms offer different possibilities to start initiatives. I think that's an important point.
Okay.
In Italy, there's a debate on a legal minimum wage. It doesn't exist in Italy for the time being. More than 80% of the workers in Italy have a contract which is national in category that stipulates a wage, but the government wants to pass a law for a minimum wage of €9 an hour. This is a very difficult debate. The unions say no, say that the minimum wage is that of the national contract, because in the national contract you don't just have their salary, you have the 13th month, the 14th month, Social Security. I mean, the actual cost of an hour of work is higher, because there's so much comprised in that. With just €9, well, if you just stipulate just €9 as the minimum wage, you might actually be lowering the worker's salary. But this is a very complex discussion. Today, many platforms to define the pay for the workers on an autonomous basis. Some platforms have decided to apply a national contract, which we'll discuss later, or in some there are specific contracts, company-wide contracts. But at any rate, there's a lot of confusion right now. In fact, it's really the platform that at the end of the day decides what to pay. When it comes to union representation, well, I'm not speaking of the European Works Council. That's what I thought that Michaelis was driving at. No, these platforms consider that they don't have a salaried worker, so they don't have to create a European Works Council at all. Only in some companies do we have union representatives, but the union representatives come from, require the fact that these workers are recognized as dependent workers. Otherwise, they're not representatives, they're just spokespersons who help to organize the workers, but they can't be considered to be union representatives. if the workers in question are not considered to be dependent workers. So in other words, we have a long way to go.
Y
In Spain, we have a minimum interprofessional minimum wage, as we call it, legally established, established by law. I think it's 900 euros a month. On an annual base. What happens, when it comes to the interaction between platform workers and the national minimum wage, is that minimum wage, and here we come back to our main problem, is that it's a salary that's set for wage workers, salaried workers, not for self-employed. So therefore, any reference to the legal minimum wage and the pay that the platform workers can get it would be purely coincidental. Because they're paid not according to the number of hours they work, but the number of orders that they fill. So if there's any relation between the national minimum wage and their pay, it's purely coincidental. Sometimes they do coincide depending on the number of orders they fill, but sometimes they don't. They get less than the national minimum wage. It depends on the company. As our Italian colleague said, in order for the workers to be represented by a union, they have to be dependent workers in the company. Since in the cases we're speaking of, they aren't dependent workers, they're self-employed, it's impossible for the unions to represent them. This is it's an argument that the companies use. They say that their workers are not dependent workers. And they say they are not dependent workers because they don't want to be represented by the unions. That's one of the arguments that they use in order to have fewer problems with their workers and to make more money.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a question. Sorry, my name is Eric Perez. I'm from Force Ouvrière. I have a question for all the speakers. We've understood that what is really at stake here and what we're talking about here is people working on platforms. And therefore, this brings together the employers, the company, and the actual market. And these platforms, these service providers on a platform, allow you, therefore, to provide that service. There's Amazon, which is a company, for example, which creates working conditions which are not really satisfactory, but it's also the market. So it decides. So the first point is, of course, legislation. How does that apply? Secondly, it's through negotiations and regulations. And finally, it's the consumers. So my question is, in Germany, you talked about, for IG Metall, the fact that platforms were going to be rated. Is there any thinking that's been given to certifying or giving some sort of label to the platform which will say that it's socially responsible or whatever? It can be at a lender level or at a federal level. And is there also a discussion undergoing in your country, which is underway in France, on setting up a hybrid status? Because you have the self-employed or the independent worker and the salaried worker. But between the two, we should probably be to find some sort of hybrid status. We're not in favor from FO, but we were just wondering if in Germany there was something in between. And so in Germany, are they really autonomous, totally independent or freelance? Or Are they somewhere in between? These are the sort of questions. So are you thinking about it? First of all, certification or giving a standard, a norm. And secondly, this question about hybrid status. And thirdly, what about the consumers and the effect of the users or consumers? In the United States, for example, there's been a case. It was with the Town Hall of San Francisco, which is not only for labor or work, but it's also for facial recognition. And there, in that particular case, we saw that the GDPD was applied, and it says that political decisions have to take these sort of factors into consideration. Okay, I suggest we have a few more comments or questions before we give you the floor. Raphaël Bertolon. I'm also from the CFE-CGC, and I'd like to follow on from what Eric said. I have a question for Ivana. I'm very interested in the Bologna Charter. The Bologna municipality represents civil society, after all. And therefore, what I was wondering for the platforms that actually are not physically located in Bologna, do we have any information about the charter, the impact of the charter, the effects on workers who are in Bologna, and compared to other parts of Italy where the charter does not exist or is not applied? As Eric said, is this some form of leverage which would allow one to somehow get a stronger footing in the collective bargaining discussions? Would you like to respond or to answer those questions?
Yes, okay. So, thanks a lot for the questions. I mean, concerning the social status of the crowd workers, we already have in Germany something in between the status of dependent employees and the status of self-employed. We've got this is called Arbeitnehmerähnlich, which means similar to workers but not a worker status, which is and this status has some rights of the workers, but not the whole list of them. For instance, not the right to form works councils, or not the right they're just a small amount of workers' rights, but not the full list. And these are workers who are maybe rather free in deciding when they work and where they work, but who are more or less dependent on one employer, so to say, on one main customer. Yeah, who are in this way dependent, but who are relatively free to organize themselves. Because in Germany, the dependent worker is defined as a person who is dependent on one employer, and the employer also tells the person where to work, how to work, when to work. Yeah, and this it's a kind of more loose dependency. It's not this full dependency, but it's partly dependence. We have got this status, but anyway, this is not really relevant for the crowd workers discussion, because crowd workers are regarded as self-employed, as they can freely choose the platforms they work for. And so they can decide when they work, how they work, where they work, and they can decide for which platform they work. Only in case they would really be dependent on one platform who offers them work, they could be regarded as more or less dependent. But I mean, in German jurisdiction, it's clear that they are self-employed. So this is clear. It's different, for example, in the food delivery sector. There, you mainly work for one employer, and these persons, you really could argue that they are not self-employed, but they are working for one employer who tells them where to bring the food to, and so it's more a dependency relationship. So it's not easy. But there's no big discussion about that, as the German Federal Ministry of Labor says that this gig work, this crowd work issue, there are too few. There are not enough people working on this in this form already to change laws for that. they said that they developed a white book 2 years ago, and in this white book, the Labor Ministry said that we need more information about the development of numbers of crowd workers, and only if you see that this will be an expanding sector, then maybe legislation will change in a way, but up to now there's no initiative for that. And also concerning the social, as you said, social responsibility of platforms. I mean, this is something, as I tried to explain before, which is initiated by some platforms themselves, these code of conduct platforms who developed a code of conduct and said, okay, in this way we want to show you that we are more or less good employers, if you regard us as employers at all. We are companies paying fair or looking for fair conditions of work. Yeah. So, but there's no real discussion about that as far as I can see. So it's not a social movement or so. Yeah.
Allora,
When it comes to the problem of recognition as a dependent worker or as a self-employed worker in the gig economy, in particular with the riders, well, there are cases that have been brought before the courts, and there was a sentence by the Appeals Court of Torino that said that these workers are self-employed. Nonetheless, they must enjoy the protections offered to employed workers, that is national contracts. That helped us a lot, and it helped to expand the recourse to national contracts. The Bologna Charter was a first milestone, not just the union, but also civil society and a city government realized that this phenomenon existed. There were the young people who rode around town on bicycles to deliver meals. They tried to give some indications as to how some protections could be extended. But it was only used in some cities, and only to a certain extent, because only small platforms signed on to it. But that was the starting point for a major debate in the country, thanks to which we could conclude a national contract and also a company contract that was drafted only a few weeks ago with very specific indications as to distances traveled, working hours, and protections, etc. So when it comes to the riders, at least, not the rest of the gig workers, but at least the riders, who are the ones who are most visible in our cities, really gives them an important advance. If there hadn't been the Bologna Charter, if there hadn't been, therefore, a certain interest aroused in public opinion, because, I mean, the national news, television news covered this Bologna Charter, if there hadn't been that, perhaps we wouldn't have been able to come as far as we have.
Michele, je crois que tu voulais introduire un point. Je propose qu'on fasse cela, puis après.
I think, Michele, you wanted to introduce something, another point, and then we'll move on to the co-op cycle, which I think is in keeping with the sort of discussions that we're having here.
Yeah, just to go further to what Ivana said, maybe in Poland we had the chance to say that in Italy in 2015 we introduced an important regulation that is Section 2 of Law number 81 of 2015. And this regulation was important because we had in the past the so-called in-between employees self-employed, and we had 20 years of problem and horrible situation. So we do not suggest you to have something like that. We left that model, and we have now this new regulation, what Ivana correctly said, and this regulation is Article 2 of this law, that it is the regulation that the tribunal, the Court of Appeal of Turin used, and it's very easy as a scheme. They say, if you have a self-employed that is organized on continuous basis on someone, these self-employed should be subject to employment relation protection. Stop. That is. So we left the awful in-between model, and we are now in this situation that is better. If we will still have it in the future, we hope, but maybe the new government is going to change it.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Now what I suggest is that we move on to the second case, the second aspect of our morning session. We can have a discussion later on. We have 10 minutes for a discussion. We could have that after the coffee break. We should also allow our interpreters to have a coffee break. We have a little bit of time and leeway for the second session.